Hello and welcome once again to the Pitcher Nail Down. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Scott Mailwood, got Sports 25 to life. And unlike the last few weeks, we actually have some decent pitchers to talk about. You're not going to have to hear us drone on about guys that really aren't worth playing, but maybe you take a shot on. So we'll start things off here at the top. Corey Kluber is your most expensive option on both sites, 11.7 on DraftKings, 11.4 on FanDuel, and 11.3, and he's somehow an underdog. I think a lot of that due to the fact you got Garrett Richards on the other side that's been pitching well, been really good against lefties. And obviously you expect good things out of Kluber. He had a couple weak starts in a row, really turned things back around with that complete game against Kansas City. As far as talent-wise, outside of Felix Hernandez, who's pitching in Coors Field, he's the best pitcher on the mound if we're talking pure talent. But I'm not sure that I'm willing to pay nearly $12,000 for a guy that's an underdog. I still like the matchup, though. I mean, it's a 6.5 run total, so I think he's a fine option. I just don't know that he's a must for me in cash games.
Yeah, especially on FanDuel where the win's worth so much. That's kind of a common problem today because two other guys I like quite a bit, John Lester and Francisco Liriano, are facing off too. Yep. And Liriano's a slight favorite in that one, but honestly, Lester's been pitching much, much better lately than Liriano has.
Yeah.
And I'm having the same problem with those two guys. And then one other one, I think McCullers and Colby Lewis is a tough one today. I like Lewis a little bit because he's been striking people out a decent amount. Houston's been striking out, although their offense has looked really good lately. But, I mean, McCullers against Texas is tough. That's basically a pick-em game, too. And then we're looking at two of the worst offenses facing off against each other, although the White Sox have been much better lately. Tampa Bay has Carnes on the mound. He's plus 111. I want to say Quintanilla is minus 120 or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really tough today. There's a ton of pick'ems, so FanDuel is going to be really tough with how much they value the win there. I mean, that might be a place where I look at Matt Cain or something like that even. So that's really my trouble at the top.
Yeah.
I mean, all of these games are like that. Even Tyson Ross against Milwaukee is only a minus 108 favorite. There's just no big favorites on the board today. The biggest one's Felix at almost minus 170, and I'm almost leaning towards playing him a little bit at only 9,500 on DraftKings. I think that's not a terrible play given the fact that Colorado's offense hasn't been great. Even though it is in Colorado, I mean, it's kind of tempting today to save, $2,000 over Kluber, who's not even a favorite.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's still been a bad offense. Obviously, they're missing their best piece now in Troy Tulowitzki.
Yeah.
Adding in Daniel Descalso instead of him certainly changes things. That's probably a lot of the reason why it's a total below 10 runs, which is very rare for games in Coors Field recently. I mean, obviously, Felix Hernandez plays into that a little bit, but Eddie Butler has not been good. So, I mean, it's tough, but I think the DraftKings price for Felix, not bad at all. Like you said, $9,500. I don't really like his $11,000 price tag on FanDuel. I don't think I'll ever touch that in GPPs.
Yeah, that's much tougher, although, I mean, with the win being pretty valuable there, I feel like this is a decent game. Like, with the rain and stuff, it could be an interesting game for him, but the 9.5 over-under is pretty tough to pay that $11,000 price tag, like you're saying. I mean, the problem is that none of these guys really stand out. I honestly think, at least on DraftKings, one of the guys I really like today, Zach Godley. He's been fantastic since he got called up, and I mean, he just seems like a pretty safe play at 5,100, especially on DraftKings where the win doesn't matter. He's a slight underdog. Facing Washington, who has really struggled lately, even though they've been getting players back off the DL. He's a really interesting option for me on both sites at a pretty cheap price tag.
Yeah, I mean, at his price tag, all you need is a consistent quality start, a guy that's not going to kill you, and it seems like, I mean, despite giving up a couple home runs in his last start, he was still pretty effective outside of that, so you got to like that. And like you said, that Washington team, there's a lot of names in that lineup, but none of them really producing right now. Even Bryce Harper not hitting Bryce Harper type of games right now. So I think for me, my favorite options, GPP specifically, is probably John Lester, $10,400 on DraftKings, and on FanDuel he's $10,000. I mean, Pittsburgh strikes out the fourth most of any team against left-handed pitching. They're 20th in team ISO, 16th in WOBA. So Lester, obviously, I'm not chasing that last game. He only had one other game with 14-plus strikeouts in his life. But, I mean, he has not quite that kind of upside, but I think he's got 10 strikeout upside against this team. And, I mean, outside of one start against the White Sox where he struggled, he hasn't given up more than 2 earned runs in any of his last 6. outside of that one, and 3 of those was 0 earned runs. So
Yeah, and all 6 of them he's gone 7+ innings too, which makes him a really, really pretty strong cash game play. The only thing I really don't like about him is that he's not a favorite here, which I don't even know if I really agree with. Liriano's been struggling a little bit. The Cubs' offense has looked a lot better with Rizzo basically hitting a home run every day now.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a really interesting play for me because if the Cubs' offense is if they can get to Liriano and put 4 or 5 runs on the board in this game, I don't see a way that he doesn't have, at the very least, a really strong shot at the win. Obviously, he's got to go through Starling Marte and Andrew McCutchen back-to-back, who both crushed lefties in that lineup. But outside of that, there's no one really scary in it. Aramis Ramirez is hitting 4th against lefties. He's better against lefties, but he just hasn't been good this year.
Yep.
I mean, Kong's been hitting 5th.
And Neil Walker much better from the left side than from the right side.
Yep. So it's a really good situation. I just wish he was a bigger favorite here, but I think he's probably my favorite GPP pitcher also. I think the upside's just massive here. And he's probably going to be under-owned because he's not the favorite and the price tag considered also. I definitely think I agree with you on that one. I think we're totally sold on that as a top GPP play. I like Felix as the secondary one, at least on DraftKings. I might even like him more than Lester on DraftKings because of that price. But on FanDuel, I think Lester is the easy choice between the two.
Yeah, and I think I do prefer Lester Liriano because Liriano, as you know, his one big struggle is walks. He's done much better this season, keeping under 9%, but the Cubs walk a ton, almost 10% as a team against lefties. So, that's a big concern. And he did face him one time this season, barely made it through 5 innings. I think he only gave up 3 earned runs and had 9 Ks. But, I mean, that's the problem with Liriano is when he's walking too many batters, his pitch count gets too high. He doesn't pitch deep into games. And as you see, 5 2/3, 6 1/3, 6 in his last 4 starts. He's just not a guy that consistently pitches deep into games. So for me, I think it's Lester. And, I'm not saying it's far and away obvious choice. But for me, I think it's a pretty significant difference between the two.
Yeah, as far as cash games go, it's a much tougher decision. I like Lester Hernandez a ton in GPPs. Don't like him nearly as much in cash games. Quintana is a guy I'd probably look at a lot in cash games. The only guy that really scares you against a lefty in that lineup is Longoria, and he just hasn't been very good even against lefties. He was a popular play. I think it was Friday against a lefty, right?
Yeah.
And he was not very good. The rest of the lineup's nothing special. They got a decent amount of lefties in it that he can neutralize. He's probably a guy I'll be using quite a bit in cash games just because he's kind of got that middling price tag. He's been pretty good outside of a couple games where he just got crushed. But, everyone's got a couple of those at this point in the season. Nobody's perfect. So, we even saw it happen to Sale against the same team. I think it happened to him against, what was that last? Who did they play last week that roughed up Sale? Yeah, it was the Royals. You're right. It happens to everybody. Another guy that's interesting, at least on DraftKings, Jesse Chavez is only 6,800 against Baltimore. Baltimore's offense has a ton of names in it now, especially with Parra slotting in that second spot, kind of moving everybody else down, but they still strike out a ton. They're prone to have games where they struggle. It's only 7.5 over/under. Chavez has been pretty good this year. It's in Oakland, which is the biggest factor for me. He's been really good at home. It's a great pitcher's park. He's an interesting cash game pitcher, too, for me.
Yeah, I'm with you there, especially like you said on that DraftKings price. You got to have 2. Makes sense tonight with some big bats to get a secondary guy that's cheap. A guy that's not really cheap, but I like a lot today. Tyson Ross. He's $9,300 on DraftKings. He's $8,600 on FanDuel. And this is a Milwaukee team that's seen almost all of their good hitters sent out of town. Carlos Gomez is gone. Gerardo Parra, who you mentioned, now in Baltimore.
Yep.
Aramis Ramirez is gone too. So really, it's Ryan Braun and it's everybody else. And Tyson Ross has actually, despite pitching at home in Petco, actually been much better on the road this season. He's got a 2.63 ERA on the road compared to 4.47 at home. And most of his numbers, are elite. He's, I believe, still first in the league in home runs per 9 innings among qualified pitcher, .28. 62.9% ground ball rates in the top 3. His 25.3% strikeout rate, I believe, is top 10. If not, it's very borderline. Really, his only weakness is 11.3% walk rate. But you look at this current Milwaukee lineup, and there's not very many patient hitters in there. There's guys in there that want to swing away. A lot of guys that are fringe major leaguers. So I think Tyson Ross is in a really good spot tonight.
Yeah. His only other weakness, you mentioned the walk thing, is that basically anytime somebody walks and they can actually get into a full speed jog, they can steal second fairly easily against him.
Yeah, you're being generous with the full speed jog. Maybe just jog. It's like he just doesn't even care.
No,
he
doesn't pay attention.
Singles a run. Good for you. Go get it.
Just steal second, steal third. It's all good. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I like him too. The biggest thing you mentioned is Milwaukee's a pretty good pitcher's park outside of allowing a ton of home runs. And like you mentioned with Ross, he has a minuscule home run rate. Braun's really the only guy in their lineup that's that scary. Ross is a really interesting GPP play too. I prefer Felix a little bit. At DraftKings, at least at that price, since they're so close together. But on FanDuel, I think Ross is probably right up there with Lester as one of the top GPP plays. Yeah. And I don't mind him as a cash game play. I wish he was a little bit bigger of a favorite, but I think that's being underprojected a little bit, if anything. Yeah. One guy I mentioned a little bit earlier, Matt Cain, is kind of interesting on DraftKings, 7,000 there. Not a guy who's striking out a ton of people. Atlanta doesn't strike out a ton, but should be a pretty low-scoring game. It's an 8 over-under right now. Cain's looked good in 2 of his last 4 starts. Struggled a little bit at Arizona where he gave up 2 home runs, and then wasn't great against Milwaukee the other day, but he wasn't terrible also. I think he's an interesting cash game option, although I prefer Chavez, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And it looks like Vegas obviously expecting the Giants to put up a big number on Fulton Witts, who has been horrible against lefties. So 4.5 run total for the Giants. You figure if Cain can just get out there, give you a quality start. I mean, it's really Freddie Freeman you're worried about, no one else in that lineup. So, he gets through him. He gives you 6 innings. He could pay that off, get the win, and be a decent play down there. Another guy who's interesting, more so on FanDuel than on DraftKings, and this one's kind of tough. I feel like a lot of people are going to have strong opinions one way or another because it is a high total. Lance McCullers pitching in Texas. You look at what you see here, and you see a 9-run total, and you see the hot weather, which has gotten to some other pitchers. We saw Madison Bumgarner get roughed up and then try to fight everybody because he was mad that he gave up some home runs. But, I mean, Lance McCullers, if you look at it, though, it's a very lefty-dominant lineup for Texas. And Lance McCullers has been incredible against lefties. 244 WOBA, 0 home runs in 40 innings pitched, 47 strikeouts. So, on the surface, this looks like stay away, stack hitters, but then you look at how good he's been against lefties, and he's only $6,700 on FanDuel. I don't really want to pay $8,800 for him in a cash game on DraftKings, but at $6,700, I mean, I don't expect him to get hit hard. So even if he's a decent play tonight on FanDuel at $6,700, you can fit all the big bats in there with him.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you mentioned, he's been great against lefties. His changeup has been ridiculous against lefties. I don't think there's been a single hit off of it all season by a left-handed hitter. Like you said, 8,800 on DraftKings against a Texas team that can put up a ton of runs is a little bit scary. 6,700 on FanDuel is just too cheap. That's what makes tonight interesting in terms of pitchers is there's a lot of different prices on pitchers across, I mean, even more than the 2 sites we're talking about. It's a pretty interesting night in terms of there's probably 12, 14 playable pitchers on this slate between all the different sites and the prices and stuff like that. And without having a major favorite, I don't think there's going to be anyone that's super highly owned. So it should be a pretty interesting night for GVPs and cash games, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so, too. You had mentioned one other guy that you liked, and I'll throw out one more guy I like as well. Garrett Richards, I think, is an interesting option. He is a small favorite. He hasn't been striking out people in the way that we saw last year. We saw him be just dominant at times. Look at his last couple starts. I mean, it just shows you his inconsistencies. He went complete game 2-hitter against Boston, then turned around, went 8 innings against Minnesota, but only 5 Ks, struggled a little bit with walks with 3. Then last time out, gave up a couple home runs, got hit pretty hard against Houston. But this is a Cleveland team that has been very, very hit or miss. I mean, they've not been a consistent offense at all. And another one of those lefty-dominant lineups, but Richards has been good against lefties. I mean, not quite McCullers good, but 285 WOBA allowed so far. 50 strikeouts in 66 innings you don't like, especially at 20 walks during that span as well. But, I mean, he's definitely a guy who has upside, and he's another one of those guys, like you mentioned, different prices ever. $8,400 on FanDuel makes him a lot more interesting of a play than what he is at almost $10,000 on DraftKings.
Yeah, definitely. He's definitely an interesting play. I mean, Cleveland struggled quite a bit at times. They've traded a bunch of the guys that were in the middle of their order at one point. The top's still kind of scary against righties with Kipnis and Santana and Brantley, but after that, I mean, there's no one in that lineup, and you can feel pretty good about it. It's a tiny over-under, like you mentioned. I think those 2 guys are probably the best bets to have solid games. The problem is I just don't know what the win's going to look like for either one of those guys with being such a close game.
Sorry. One more thing I forgot to mention on that. Jason Kipnis did get an MRI yesterday, and they say it possibly goes on the DL, which would definitely help Garrett Richards. I mean, if you take out their best on base, the best guy getting on base, I mean, the guy's just incredible. He's got like a 380 WOBA. So if you take Jason Kipnis out of there, you're really not worried about having a whole lot of base runners there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's an interesting point, too. If he's out of the lineup, that makes it just even better matchup. And in that case, I'd probably lean Richards ahead of Kluber, honestly, because it's going to be tough for them to get run support for Kluber. And Kluber's got to go through, I assume, probably Mike Trout, Pujols, the rest of the Angels lineup. It's just a tougher team at this point, especially if Kipnis is out. I think the only other guy on here that I really would consider at all is Bartolo Colon. He's 6,000 on DraftKings. The Mets rotation with the 6 guys and 5 of them being like really young guys, and then the 6th guy being Bartolo Colon is just hilarious to me.
Yeah.
But against Miami without Stanton, I mean, he hasn't been great, but he's been serviceable. You should get 6+ innings out of him. Probably 2 or 3 earned runs, you would think. I think, I got a team total of 4 for Miami and a team total of 3.5 for the Mets. Check that. 3.5 for Miami and 4 for the Mets. So I think he's a decent option. I still prefer some of these other guys. Like I prefer Godley and Chavez on DraftKings. It's a little bit more in play probably on FanDuel just because the guys aren't as cheap there. Not a guy I love, but I think he's just another option in that low price range.
Yeah, the last guy I'm really going to throw out here, and I mean he's more of a secondary cash option because he doesn't have a whole lot of upside, is Nate Karns. Outside of a game where he gave up 7 earned runs to KC, he hasn't allowed more than 2 earned runs in any of his last 8 starts. So, I mean, he's a guy that doesn't strike out a lot of batters, but he also doesn't give up a lot of base runners. He's efficient, usually pitches 6 to 7 innings. So, if you need a secondary guy there, just as a safety net, we saw the White Sox have a little resurgence for about a week. Coming back down to earth now because this is still just not a very good offense. Yeah,
definitely. I agree with that one, too. I mean, he's just a little pricey for me is the only thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't feel, like I said, these middle guys, you don't feel great about a lot of them, but a lot of them have some potential tonight. So good luck with your decisions. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.